What would Martin Luther King say if he saw that? If he saw Zozibini Tunzi with that crown glistening over the curly hair that once tried to be silenced? If he saw the world applauding a woman who carries in her face, her body, and her silence the story of so many who were taught to hide? What would Martin Luther King say if he sat in that audience, surrounded by mixed faces, listening to the words of a black woman who did not conform, who did not disguise herself, who did not ask for permission? He would say that it still hurts, but he would also say, look at what we can still become. Have you noticed how loud this victory is? Not because of the crown, not because of the title, but because of the absence of permission. Nobody allowed her to be there. She went, she existed. And that bothers some. Because racism, my brother, my sister, it has never been just about offense. It is a silent project, an erasure disguised as normality. It's what tells us where we can be, how we should speak, what we should straighten. It's what looks at us in the mirror and says it is not enough, that our hair is too much, that our skin is too much, that our presence is exaggerated. And when someone like Zozibini steps on that stage without apologizing for existing, the entire system trembles. Because the system was designed so that we never get there. Martin Luther King always said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And you feel it in your skin, don't you? It's not just about beauty contests. It's about entering a store and being followed. It's about going to an interview and noticing the look. It's about the silence when you speak. It's about the hidden laughter when you walk by. It's about the exhaustion of explaining that racism doesn't need to be shouted to be real. Racism is sophisticated, and it hides in the backhanded compliment, the neutrality politics, the phrase, "But I don't see color." You see color, I see color. We always have. Martin Luther King fought not for a world where color ceased to exist, but for a world where it didn't determine if you would live or survive, where color was not a sentence, a margin, a statistic. He didn't dream that we would be ignored in the name of equality. He dreamed that we would be recognized in our dignity. And that's why, upon seeing Zozibini on that runway, he would not see just a miss. He would see an act of disobedience. He would see a young black woman returning color to the eyes of so many girls who learn to see themselves through the lens of others. And make no mistake, this is not an isolated symbol, this is a consequence. A consequence of voices that were silenced by punches, bullets, decrees, and absences. A consequence of people who refused to die silently. Martin Luther King knew that every step forward was built upon the ruins of a history told by others. And he knew that our freedom wouldn't come on a silver platter, but in the stubbornness of persisting. Even when nobody applauds, even when they call it an exaggeration, even when they say it's already gotten better. Better for whom? How many black bodies still need to turn into statistics for you to admit that the system is still operating? How many black children will grow up without seeing themselves in magazines, movies, books? How many doors need to close for you to recognize that they were never truly open? And if they are open, how many locks are still in place, waiting for someone who knows how to use the right keys? Zozibini held that key, not because she was allowed to, but because she knew where to look. Martin Luther King did not romanticize the struggle. He knew the cost. He knew that peace does not come from the silence of the oppressed. He knew that resistance needs to cause discomfort. And if you feel uncomfortable seeing a black woman occupying a space that wasn't designed for her, then maybe you are feeling for the first time the taste of what they have always tried to give us, exclusion. But contrary to what they expected, we continue. We still sing, we still dance, we still dream. And this dream, my brother, is not made of cotton candy. It is made of scars. Of bodies hanging from trees, of names crossed off lists, of diplomas that guarantee nothing, of uniforms that frighten, of looks that pierce, of doubts that hurt more than any slap. This dream is tough, and yet it exists. Martin Luther King would not see Zozibini's coronation as a happy ending. He would see it as a spark, a reminder, a breath amid so many struggles that still need to happen. He would tell you that racism against black people is not about color, it is about power, and that every time you bow your head, this power grows. But every time you see yourself in a body like hers, something in the system breaks, and that's when change begins. Have you ever wondered how many stories were lost because someone said, "This is not a place for you"? How many dreams have withered for lack of a mirror? How many times have you needed to be twice as good to get half the recognition? Martin Luther King spoke about this pain, but he also spoke about hope. Not silly hope, that waits seated, but the kind that gets up even when scared, that walks even in the midst of exhaustion, that insists even when everything says to stop. Zozibini didn't win because she was allowed to. She won despite the denial. And that echoes. That transcends time. It makes Martin Luther King smile with tearful eyes, because the dream he had was this one, the dream of a world where the beauty of a black woman doesn't need to be explained, defended, tolerated, but simply celebrated. Do you understand the depth of this? It's not about aesthetics, it's about existence. It's about arriving at a place and not being the exception. It's about not having to justify your presence. It's about not being a symbol. It's about simply being. And as long as this is still extraordinary, we are still in the struggle. Martin Luther King wouldn't say that we have won, but he would say that we continue. And that you, looking at this story, need to understand that watching is not enough. Feeling emotional is not enough. Agreeing is not enough. You need to act. You need to refuse the comfort that distances us from the truth. You need to make noise, even when everything asks for silence, because each achievement like this is at the same time celebration and denunciation. It is proof that we are capable and a reminder that we still need to fight to be seen as human. Can you feel that? Then look again at the image of Zozibini on that runway, and see. See with Martin Luther King's eyes. See with your own. See with the eyes of the black girls who still don't know that they are beautiful, and understand this dream is not over. It is only just beginning. You are still hearing this voice that might never have spoken to you like this before. A voice that doesn't want to convince you, but to awaken you. Because if there's something Martin Luther King always knew, it's that conscience is not born from silence. It comes from restlessness, from discomfort, from the moment when you can no longer pretend you haven't seen, haven't felt, haven't understood. It's at this point that the true movement begins. And it doesn't need a march, it needs courage. Do you know what King would say if he looked into your eyes right now? He would ask, are you willing to pay the price of truth? Because fighting against racism is not about posting a nice quote. It is not about repeating a ready-made speech. It is not about clapping when it's easy. It is about having the courage to lose friends, to lose privileges, to lose comfort. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to rock the structure when it favors their place. But Martin Luther King always said, "What worries me is not the scream of the bad, but the silence of the good." And you know exactly what silence he was talking about. Racism against black people is not a shadow of the past. It is the poorly disguised present. It is in the data, in the subtext, in the details. You might not see it, but it sees you. It shapes decisions, defines opportunities, delineates spaces. It says who can and who cannot, who rises and who serves, and who. And when someone dares to break this logic, there are no shortage of voices disguised as common sense, trying to put everything back in its proper place. But who defined this place? Martin Luther King fought against a system that said people like him were less capable, less human, less worthy. And today, even after so many apparent achievements, you still need to prove your worth. You need to fit in, you need to ask, as if your existence needed to be justified. Aren't you tired of this? The black body has always been treated as a body in dispute, to be used, to be molded, to be controlled, never to be heard, never to be respected. Martin Luther King understood early on that the problem wasn't just segregation on the buses, it was the separation inside minds. It was the sideways glance. It was the fear of sharing the world with those who had always been kept on the margins. He knew that racism was less about hatred and more about control, less about insult and more about power. And what is most frightening about this power is how much it has become commonplace, invisible, untouchable. You feel it when you enter a room and realize that you've already been defined before you even speak. When someone is surprised by your intelligence, by your manners, by your demeanor. as if all these qualities do not fit within your skin, as if you came from a place where these qualities do not grow, and there's no point in disguising it. You know when you're being measured. It is at this moment that King whispers again, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, or their background, or their religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love." But what are we teaching today? What kind of love is this that tolerates exclusion, that embraces inequality, that turns a blind eye to someone else's pain? What love is this that does not correct injustice, that does not stand up against absurdity, that is not moved by the repeated deaths of black people? And if the love you know does not make you move, then maybe it is not love, maybe it is fear disguised, or selfishness masked as neutrality. Martin Luther King knew that neutrality is the cowardly sister of violence. It supports the oppressor while silencing the oppressed. It pretends impartiality, but always has a side, and almost never is it ours. Have you noticed how we need to smile more, speak better, walk right, never make mistakes? Because any slip becomes justification. Because the mistake of one black person is the reflection of all the others. And the success is an exception, never the rule. We grow up hearing that we need to be twice as good to have half as much. But no one tells you that even being twice as good, sometimes they will still give you nothing. And when that happens, you look in the mirror and ask yourself if the problem is you. It isn't. Martin Luther King knew that the system feeds on your doubt, that it weakens your identity to make you believe that the problem is personal, individual, punctual. But the problem is structural. It is deep. It is historical. And you do not need to accept this as destiny. You do not need to mold yourself to fit into a space that was never made for you. Zozibini did not mold herself. And she did not win because of that. She won despite that. She did not enter the room asking for permission. She entered as if she knew the floor was also hers. And perhaps that is the greatest revolution, existing without apologizing, loving your own skin without asking for validation, recognizing your own beauty in a world that still insists on hiding mirrors. Martin Luther King would say, "You do not have to become what they expect. You have to become what you are." And this, my brother, my sister, is dangerous, because when a black person accepts themselves, the system collapses, because it was designed to keep us fragmented, divided, at war with each other, competing for crumbs, forgetting that the true enemy was never another black person. It was silence. It was conformity. It was fear. Are you afraid? Afraid of losing space, afraid of saying what you think, afraid of being called radical, afraid of raising a flag that you carry within your own blood. But what if Martin Luther King had given in to fear? What if he had kept silent out of convenience? What if he had accepted that things are just the way they are? We would not be here. That is why he insisted so much on love. Not passive love, but the love that transforms, that confronts, that refuses to accept oppression as routine. The love that stands between the oppressor and the victim and says, "Enough." Have you done that? Because deep down it's easy to talk about racism when it's far away, when it is an old image, a told story. But what about when it happens right in front of you? What about when you see a black woman being diminished, being ignored, being objectified? What about when you witness a black man being mistaken for a security guard, being treated as a threat, being stopped for no reason? What do you do? Martin Luther King always believed that silence is also a choice, and that there is no neutrality when the pain is evident. You either combat the system or you sustain it. There is no middle ground, and it's no use saying that it's not your problem. It concerns all of us, because as long as a single black person is prevented from dreaming, the entire world loses. As long as a single black girl grows up believing that her hair needs to be hidden, the entire future weakens. As long as a single black family has to bury their child due to a police error, there is no progress. Do you understand that? The fight against racism is not just for the black population. It's a matter of humanity. And if you still see this issue as secondary, perhaps you need to revisit your concepts of justice, of empathy, of civility. Martin Luther King did not ask for favors. He demanded rights. He did not want revenge. He wanted equality. And we are still far from it, because equality is not treating everyone the same. It's understanding the differences and guaranteeing that they aren't a reason for exclusion. Can you imagine how many talents have been erased because the world wasn't ready for them? How many scientists, artists, leaders, and teachers were swallowed by the lack of opportunity? Can you feel the weight of that on your shoulders? King felt it, and still he walked, even with threats, even with doubts, even with fear. Because he knew the walk wasn't for him, it was for you, it was for me, it was for everyone who was yet to come. And now that you are here, what are you going to do with it? Because history doesn't need more spectators, it needs participants. People who stand up when everyone else is silent, voices that refuse to follow the script. Martin Luther King would say, if you're not ready to die for something, then you're not ready to live. And maybe this sounds harsh, but for us, life has always been a struggle. It has always been resistance. It has always been an act of affirmation. And if your existence still bothers others, then keep going, because it's a sign that you are stirring things up where it matters. Now go, and take this voice with you, not as an echo, but as a beacon, because the dream still lives, and it needs you to keep breathing. You feel it, but often can't name it. You see it, but sometimes hesitate to point it out. Racism against black people doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it whispers, pushes slowly, imposes itself so repeatedly that it seems routine. And that's exactly how it wins. When it disguises itself as normality. When everyone thinks it's an exaggeration. When even you start to doubt your own pain. Martin Luther King knew this was the cruelest part. The part where they convince you that you are wrong for existing the way you are. When they try to say that if you smile more, bow more, thank more, maybe then they'll listen. But listening to you out of compassion is not justice, and there's nothing more you need to do to be seen as human. You already are. But the world still acts as if you're not. It still kills by mistake. It still ignores by choice. It still exalts when it wants to, and disappears when it no longer needs you. Racism has updated itself, changed its clothes, become elegant, corporate, academic, digital. It is in the algorithm that erases black faces, in the politics that call on you only during elections, in the resume that is never enough, in the "it's not quite like that" you hear every time you point out an injustice. So I ask you, how long will you accept this as part of the game? Martin Luther King never spoke with fear. He spoke with an urgency that is still lacking in many people, because he knew that to change anything, it was necessary to confront it. And we can't avoid the question anymore. What are you doing with the place you occupy, with the voice you have, with the time you still have? Because it doesn't help to see if you choose not to act. It doesn't help to know if you choose not to speak. It doesn't help to feel if you choose to remain silent. You don't need permission to stand up. Racism already has too much space. What is missing is courage. Courage to break the cycle. Courage to disturb. Courage to make mistakes while trying. To get it right by insisting. To make space even when everything tells you to step back. Martin Luther King believed in a strength that can't be bought, that can't be imposed. He believed in that strength that arises when someone says enough. Not with hatred, but with firmness. When someone looks at another and sees an equal, not a threat. When someone decides they will no longer accept living halfway. And if you have come this far, you already know, silence was never innocent. And you can't be either. You need to occupy. Occupy the spaces that were denied to you. Occupy the conversation that excluded you. Occupy the story that wasn't told. Occupy with presence, with truth, with that lucidity that disturbs because it doesn't bow down. You need to start. Because racism will not stop on its own. It moves with what you allow, with what you normalize, with what you pretend not to see. It grows with each concession, with each let it go, with each better not talk about this now. But when you speak, when you confront, when you exist without apologizing, something changes. Martin Luther King would tell you that the dream was never about tomorrow. The dream has always been about the now. And it lives or dies in every choice you make. So answer me honestly, what is your choice?